Jason, thank you for joining me today. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me. My name is Jason McNew. I'm a Principal Solutions Advisor with ConnectWise. Prior to coming to ConnectWise, I had a long, diverse career in the technology sector. A whole lot of that was within the defense space. I'm an Air Force veteran. I spent 13 years at the White House Communications Agency, 10 of which was at Camp David. So what I tell people oftentimes is I spent a lot of time working in buildings with no windows, surrounded by barbed wire and machine guns, and kind of these extreme security environments. In 2017, I founded Stronghold Cybersecurity, which was a small consulting practice, and we worked primarily with defense industrial base. That was acquired in 2020 by an MSP based in Pennsylvania. And then last year I came to ConnectWise, and now I'm working with our partners on educating their clients.
Excellent, excellent. So you definitely come with a great background. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is it seems that cybersecurity has changed. Both you and I are kind of aware of that, but most business owners aren't. And I'm wondering if you could give us a thumbnail sketch of what's changed in the last 10 or 15 years.
Well, the technology's changed, the threat landscape has changed. Just to put things in perspective, I saw a joke slide, and I wish I had it in front of me here, and it says, 2000, don't talk to strangers and don't get in strangers' cars, right? And then below that, it says 2020, literally summon strangers from the internet to get into their cars, right? Which is what we're doing with Uber. And, something else I was thinking about the other day, do you remember a couple of years ago, those Mac versus PC commercials, right? You had the Mac guy was cool and the PC guy wasn't, right? And Apple was making fun of Microsoft at the time, because Microsoft's operating system was prompting users to do things. Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And I just got a new iPhone, and everything on it all has to be whitelisted. So Microsoft was right about that, and Apple wasn't. Think about that, right? Whenever you get a new Android or a new iPhone, anything, do you want to turn on location services? Do you want to turn on the mic? Do you want to turn on the camera? It just shows you how the threat landscape has changed. And one of the analogies that I like to make is, let's think about cars, the way cars have changed, right? You wouldn't go back to a car that just had crumple zones and seat belts. You could, you know what I mean? You would ideally at least prefer to have a car that's ABS and airbags, which might be a little bit better. And then beyond that, you could go out and get cars that have lane keep assist and automatic braking and lane departure warning and all these other things, to keep us safe. So the technology has just changed. And one of the things that I like to point out that makes this profession more challenging than other professions, and IT and cybersecurity are both kind of trades. And I say that because you could start practicing IT in your bedroom with with your Apple computer or your Commodore, which is what we had in the 80s, right? You don't do that as an accountant or a lawyer. But cybersecurity is a practice, like medical and like law. We call it a practice. Doctors are practitioners, lawyers are practitioners. And in the medical field, it advances rapidly, but normally you'll see things coming down the pike. There's new research, there's new periodicals, there's peer-reviewed papers, right? In the law, legal, and finance, it's the same thing. There's bills sitting in committee. There's new regulations coming, best practices. Cybersecurity, we could wake up tomorrow and find out that some algorithm that we've found to be thought was cryptographically secure is no bueno. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden, something that we've been doing goes right out the window, and well, there goes your vacation or whatever it is you're doing. You could wake up one morning and then the whole world is just on fire. That's the nature of our business. And some new threat, some flaw was discovered, something like that.
Yeah, I often, when I'm talking to clients, I'll talk in 10-year increments. And I'll often say, hey, what we did in 2000 was good. It was best practices then, but the world was different. 10 years later, the world was so different that best practices were totally different than what we did 10 years ago. Here it is, by the time we got to 2020, the hacking landscape had changed so significantly that stuff we were really happy to have in 2010 no longer would ever work in a business today. And I think we're seeing that again and again, and business owners are really struggling to understand that.
Yeah, this is the classic example of the sword and the shield, and it's just like the history of warfare, right? They come up with wooden swords, and then there are wooden shields, and then there's metal swords, and then metal shields, and then you had trebuchets and long spears. It's just sort of evolution. And the point is in the history of warfare, and cyber is another form of warfare. It's not as violent, but the aggressor always has the advantage, always.
Mm,
That's just the nature of it.
mm. Yeah, I think if you think back to knights on horses and they're armed with a sword, and suddenly guys appear over the hill and they've got the first guns, which are more like a handheld cannon.
Yeah, sure.
It changed the nature of the game. Suddenly, those knights needed different protections. So
Yeah,
they didn't
yeah,
take
absolutely. I think the corollaries are very, very strong, because it's a form of warfare. It's not as violent and it's not kinetic, so to speak. But it has, objectives, which is appropriation, generally expropriation of funds normally, or, treasure in any case.
Do you have any thoughts about the differences or the choice of convenience versus security? I talk to so many people, they're going, oh, that's just too much trouble.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what. Now, me as a CISSP, Certified Information System Security Professional, and I forgot to mention before, I also have a master's degree in cybersecurity from Penn State, but we're risk managers. Everything is about risk management, right? When I worked in the classified realm, we bolted down everything as tight as it would go, everything, period. And that's just how it is. But that's not practical in the private sector. It's not practical in your day-to-day life. It's not cost effective. It's not reasonable. You know what I mean? But if we're protecting, for example, avionics systems from a B-2 bomber, or the location of the president, or, the contents of the nuclear football, those kinds of things, they require different protections than what you would need in your daily life. And you sort of have to look at everything from a risk management perspective. What's the probability of an adverse event? What's the impact of an adverse event? Which is how we express risk, loosely speaking. And then what are we going to do to mitigate that? And sometimes we do choose convenience over security if it's appropriate, right? And I'll give you a prime example of that. Let's look at our data, right? Internally, we have data, let's say, that's proprietary, or you have PHI, protected health information, PII. But then let's say we have things that are like marketing collateral, right? The things that go on your website, PDFs that you publish anyway. You don't want them to get ripped off, but the impact, if they do get ripped off, really is minimal. It's not that big of a deal, right? So we're not going to spend a lot of time securing our public-facing website that is only marketing collateral versus an internal system, if that makes sense. So in a case like that, we can choose convenience over security because it makes sense to do so operationally, fiscally, in terms of risk management, so on and so forth.
You're making me think of the new regulations I'm seeing so many industries encounter today, where I think this is being pushed down by the government, where they're just tired of hearing about the horses getting out of the barn. Like there's a new regulations coming down from the FTC that's going to affect CPAs and accountants.
Right.
The medical industry has had these for years. If you make products for the government or the military, you're going to have to be CMMC certified.
Yes.
So we're seeing those kind of things. But when I talk to business owners, they seem shocked to see that they are now subject to these controls.
Well, right. And 100 years ago, they would have been shocked that they had to put in fire escapes and decent lighting too. You know what I mean? I would compare the state of cybersecurity to the state of safety it was 100 years ago. And we've read stories. Remember learning about the jungle in school up in Sinclair, right? Yuck. And then there's the famous stories about, people getting burned alive and all these other things. I would say the state of cybersecurity in the private sector now is probably similar to the way that safety was 100 years ago. People were losing fingers and eyes and that kind of stuff. And those kinds of things in this day and age are relatively just not common anymore. You know what I mean? So this is an evolutionary process, and I think we're kind of at the beginning stages of it.
So there are two things I really want to discuss today, and they're two specific tools that are considered important to help secure businesses. The first is EDR, and EDR seems to have replaced antivirus. Can you remind our guests, our viewers, what did antivirus do?
Antivirus is old school stuff. Okay. It's simple pattern matching technology, kind of like a fingerprint. So you have a piece of malicious logic, right? And then you run it through an algorithm and then you hash it and you fingerprint it so you know exactly what it looks like. And you put it into a database. And then when you see it again, boom, you know it, right? So it's pattern, it was simple pattern matching, and then it could quarantine a piece of malicious logic so that it wouldn't do anything. It was, a lot better than nothing. But it's, kind of crude and very, very limited. So the biggest problem with antivirus is when you have a new piece of malicious logic, something that's unknown or you haven't seen before, or in a worst case, what we call a 0-day exploit, which is something that's never been seen before in the wild. Traditional antivirus is not going to pick that up. Simple terms, I would compare traditional antivirus to having a car with seat belts and crumple zones. You could drive that, sure. You know what I mean? It's your choice to do that. Now, EDR, endpoint detection and response, it does have those pattern matching capabilities, but also has pattern recognition capabilities. So if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, EDR is going to say, that's a duck, right? Even if it hasn't seen that particular duck before, or if the duck is wearing a hat and sunglasses and a mustache, even if it's trying to disguise itself, EDR is still going to recognize that because it has your pattern recognition, your pattern matching. It can actually do code analysis. It does behavior analysis. So not only is it looking, at the duck itself, it's looking what the duck is doing, or where'd the duck come from? How's the duck walking? What is it doing? Where is it going? So on and so forth. And can look at all of these things and then make a decision if something is malicious in nature. And not only can it quarantine it, it could also clean up after it in real time, clean up the mess. So the duck is the EDR, the virus, the duck is walking through and it's pooping on the floor. It'll clean up the poop too. It's a whole orders of magnitude better than antivirus.
So I see a lot of people who are unaware, I'm going to use a big word, that software can be polymorphic and change itself. So it looks one way on one computer and is different on another. And if you had pattern recognition of the old antivirus, you wouldn't be able to recognize it because it's now changed.
That's exactly correct. And that's what EDR is designed to recognize, and there's other things. There's, binary weapons, so to speak, where you have two pieces of malicious logic that work together, polymorphic. There are, different forms of malicious logic that can actually alter themselves. And I believe that was one of the principal components of Stuxnet, at least of what is the information that's publicly available. If you remember that was quite a weapon. And somebody told me that they thought that was probably $1 billion project.
Yes, I think it's also the first example of cyber warfare.
Maybe.
We don't know everything. Another thing I wanted to talk about, antivirus versus EDR, is antivirus would scan what you gave it. Very often it was what was downloaded at the moment. Gee, it passed antivirus, it's fine, I'm going to put it in my folder. But today's malware can sometimes sit quietly for a time and do nothing, and then like a seed, it'll germinate and start following its commands.
Yeah, sure. It detonates,
Yeah, and I understand that EDR is looking at the behaviors to say, whoa, this is happening as a result of this program, and that's not allowed because it's constantly watching. It didn't just scan it because it came in, it's constantly scanning the system, looking for bad behaviors.
That's right. To go back to my car analogy, I love my analogies, but remember I said that antivirus is, imagine a car with seatbelts and crumple zones, right? And I have one. My son is an '83 Mercedes diesel, right? It's a big old hunk of iron, and it has those things. So that would be AV, but EDR and MDR, which is EDR that's monitored by a SOC in real time, that's more like having a car that has anti-lock brakes, airbags, traction control, lane keep assist, imagine collision detection, collision avoidance, and then lane departure warning, all these other things. Think of, a brand new loaded Lexus with all the safety gizmos in it. That's all the things that EDR and MDR offer. They're just so much more advanced than AV. They're just not in the same league at all. And you have to make that decision. Do I want to drive a car with seatbelts and crumple zones, or do I want to drive a car with, collision avoidance?
So you could get where you want to go with either, but one is going to protect you a hell of a lot more than the other.
Yeah. Well, and on the other hand, I mean, an adverse event is far more likely with antivirus. Yeah, I guess maybe you could argue that you're more likely to get into an accident in a car that doesn't have collision avoidance. Sure. Yeah, I think that analogy holds. Yeah. Okay. You're reducing both the probability and the impact dramatically with that technology. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's shift to another point and talk about SIEM.
Yeah, security information and event monitoring. Mm-hmm.
And how is that being leveraged today to protect businesses?
Now, SIEM is kind of an abstract concept, and I have slides that I like to use with these, and maybe we could get them in here. I'll send them to you, and you could edit them in if you want. But so you have all these various devices on your network. You have computers, servers, routers, switches, firewalls. You have intrusion detection. You might have IoT devices. You could have clocks. You could have SCADA. And all these things generate logs, right? System logs. And these logs are security relevant, and they mean different things. But 99.99% of this stuff is just noise, right? It's noise. Now think of, go to the FAA's website and then look at the air traffic maps. And at any given time, you've seen all the airplanes over the United States. You ever see that map? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So you have the FAA, and they're watching all these airplanes are going everywhere at every altitude in every direction all the time, right? That's kind of similar to the amount of noise that's on your network that humans don't really see. Now, out of all those things that those airplanes are doing, how often is there something that an operator needs attention and has to intervene and then tell, oh, we have an adverse event, we have an airplane where it doesn't belong, or there's an accident or something like that. It's not that much. So you have to filter out all of that noise. And that noise requires a form of automation. It requires, SIEM, not SIEM, fusion engine, correlation. So it's going to ingest all of these logs, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, depending on the size of the network. It could be millions of them per day. And then it will distill them down and then correlate them along with your EDR and your MDR, and then point to these things that are going to require intervention, and out of all those logs, again, that are being generated, very, very little of them are anything that's going to require a human attention. But just think about going back to my example of the FAA. When something needs attention from a human, it needs attention from a human right now. You know what I mean? And that's what these.
So rather than hiring a team of people, maybe even an entire building floor of people to go through all that data, I'm thinking about my flight app on my phone. I've got all these little yellow planes and their pathways. It strips away the noise and shows us the one airplane in red that's aiming for the White House.
That's exactly correct. That's a perfect analogy. Yeah, it's going to show you, it's going to strip out 10,000 planes and then show you, well, this one's doing something it shouldn't be doing, and we need to do something about it. Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to collect all these log files. It's going to correlate the data, and it'll identify and then alert on those things that are bad.
Correct. And it also aids in forensics, right? So let's go back to our airplane examples. Again, those events are recorded, right?
Yeah. Where'd that plane come from?
Exactly. So, we could, let's say something slips through because the technology is not perfect. Even with defense in depth, you can have all this technology in place, right? If you had an advanced persistent threat, state-backed actor, some piece of new piece of malicious logic, advanced malware, something might slip through. Or let's say that you have an insider threat, somebody, a malicious administrator, or somebody stealing information. SIEM, those logs will go back in time, and you could go back and then they'll leave you a trail of breadcrumbs, so you could go back and then do forensics. And we're starting to see that a lot of cyber security insurance policies are requiring these technologies so that they could go back and then, whodunit. We need evidence to go back and then do investigations. So we need to save those logs and see, who logged in, who logged out, when were accounts created, when was there privilege escalation, what applications were launched, what was installed, what was uninstalled, when was a registry accessed, this, so on and so forth. And we could go back and then do investigations after the fact. Because I think you've seen the statistics. Oftentimes we find that, these intruders will be sitting in the network for a long time before they do anything, right? When you finally find out they're there, you could go back into your SIEM, and then maybe we could start figuring out what is going on. Oh, somebody created a new domain admin account at 2 a.m. on Christmas. That shouldn't have happened. You know what I mean?
And a lot of people don't understand. They think that as soon as the hacker breaches the system, they're going to start doing things. Increasingly, they sit there and they watch how the business operates. They're going, how do we monetize this opportunity? Are we just going to steal data? Are we going to deny them access to their own data? Or maybe we could leverage their connections with other people to get money or scam them out of things. So it's the hackers get in and then try to figure out what's the best move.
Yeah, that's exactly. They sneak into the building, they wait for you to close shop, and they wait around, and then, get out the flashlight and see what's going on. And the analogy I like to make there is it's like mold in your wall. You're not going to know it's there unless you go looking for it. You know what I mean? You gotta, and this is what threat hunting means. It means threat hunting, right? Imagine you were going to look for mold in your walls in the house. You'd have to cut the walls open and look in there. You know what I mean? That's how threat hunting is. It's threat hunting.
So SIEM does two major features. It alerts us to things we might not notice otherwise.
Correct.
And after it happens, it allows us to go back and find out what happened, what were the steps, how were we compromised, so that we can make things stronger for the future.
That's exactly correct. Yep, for forensics purposes. Yep.
That's excellent. Well, Jason, is there anything else you wanted to add? Those were the two main concepts I wanted to talk about.
I should add that I'm thrilled to see these technologies being made available to the small to mid-sized business space. We had this stuff in the Department of Defense 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Heck, I remember going to a drill weekend. I want to say it was 2004. And then the commander's telling us, oh, we're putting multi-factor authentication. What's that? You know what I mean? Wow. And then we were, rolling out SIEM, 15 years ago. And these technologies were, they were only in the enterprise space. And even think about EDR. EDR technology did not exist in the SMB space as recently as 6 or 7 years ago. So I remember some of the big companies that were selling these advanced EDR technologies, you would have to have at least 1,000 seats to even get a license with them. They wouldn't even talk to you. You need to be like Boeing or Nabisco or something. You know what I mean?
Imagining that the costs of these solutions were astronomical at the time.
That's correct. So, through automation, economies of scale, advancements in technology, as always, we're making, technology gets better, faster, and cheaper on a year-over-year basis. And that's one of the things I absolutely love about the tech sector. What other sector of the global economy makes its products better, faster, and cheaper on a year-over-year basis? Boy, I wish that education and healthcare were like that, right? So as a result of the nature of our sector of the economy, we're making these advanced protective technologies that were only available to Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Nabisco and the Pentagon 15 years ago. Now you could be a little dental clinic or an auto clinic or whatever, and you could get 5 or 10 seats of this stuff for a reasonable cost and have protections for yourself that just weren't available previously.
Excellent. Excellent.
And that's frankly, it's one of the things I love about what I do is helping the small to mid-sized business, because I, could go work for Google or Facebook and help drive shareholder value, but I'd much rather help you and your RMSP partners and their clients. I grew up in a small to mid-sized business space. I had my own business. So that's where my heart is.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I look forward to next time very much.
It's been a pleasure. I could blab about this stuff forever.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.